Hello, everybody, and welcome back to The Advisor with Stacey Chillemi. I'm very excited to have our very special guest. It's Bryan Wetzel. He is part of our podcast community. He has his own podcast on our channel, and his specialty is talking about parenting and the educational system. And today we're gonna hit the topic about the evolution from helicopter parenting to lawnmower parenting and snow plowing parenting. And he's going to go a little more in depth and explain to you what the three mean and why they're so vital in today's world and how we can actually help our educational system by implementing some of the tools and tips that he has today for us. And before we begin, I just like to give a quick shout out to our sponsors, iHeartRadio and Speaker, who make this happen for us. And I'm very excited, Bryan, to have you on the show. And I just want to mention to everybody before we begin that you are an author and that you have the book The Real Problems Destroying Education. And I really highly suggest this book for a lot of people. It's an excellent book, and there's a lot going on in our educational system today that I think that people really need to really focus on, especially if you have children in the educational system. There are a lot of issues that really need to be taken seriously and changes that need to be made. Now, today, tell us a little about how would you define helicopter parenting compared to lawnmower parenting or snowplow parenting?
Well, lawnmower parenting is different from snowplow and helicopter parenting was the initial uh, word that was given. And it came about from an interview that a doctor had done with a girl that he was doing, I guess, counseling with. And she kept saying, my mother hovers all the time, and she's just always there to swoop in. And so helicopter parenting is really just defined by parents who are always nearby to swoop in and fix things or to take care of things, or if there's a problem, um, to get it taken care of instead of letting the child take care of it. And over the past 10 years, it's developed into what's called lawnmower parenting. And if you live up north, it can be called snowplow parenting. But the difference is that instead of hovering and swooping in, now you get in front of every issue, every possible problem that your child may face and try and clear the path so that they don't have to deal with any adversity.
Right.
And that sounds like it's one of those things that I think as a parent, it sounds good. Like
Yeah.
I'm helping my child, but what the data, and there's some out of Florida State, University of Houston, there's been several studies on this that show that they do worse in college. They
Hmm.
have trouble making decisions because they've never had to make decisions. Someone's already made it for them throughout most of their, early
Yeah.
life. And so they get into college where they have to make a decision and they have anxiety. They also
Right.
show in that data and all the studies that the parents who hover or clear the path, a lot of those kids end up with more anxiety and have to be on medicine because life is challenging, and if you've never had to face it, if your parents didn't teach you how to face it,
Right.
then you get anxious. I'm not saying I was a perfect parent, but I learned from my parents whenever they would tell me to make a decision, and then if it didn't work, we would talk about why that might have been. But they never jumped in front of things. And I always
Yeah.
tell this story that when I had my restaurant, 3 times I had a parent call me up and ask if their child who was fired could come back and work. And I would, in my head, you're trying to be diplomatic, but in my head, I'm thinking, well, if your child didn't feel the need to call me, then why should I even consider this?
Yeah.
Um, and if I had asked my mom to call because I'd gotten fired from someplace, she would have laughed and said, "No, you need to move on somewhere else, and you need to do better." Most of
Exactly.
the people who were fired for habitually being late
Yeah.
or stealing, in one case. And I remember telling the mom, I said, "Look, he was busted for stealing, and I just can't have that." here in the restaurant. And if I hire them back, then I'm telling all the other employees that there is an option for breaking such a rule. And so I'm not going to do that. But I just remember the first time that happened, I was really shocked. I have a friend who works for an advertising agency. She told me that at least 20 to 25% of the applications that come in and resumes were written by the parents. You can tell.
Oh, wow.
And she said that twice a parent has literally shown up with their 23, 24-year-old at the agency for the interview. Um, if I saw that, I would be concerned that your child is not self-sufficient.
Exactly.
And so I think that the billboard that you're putting out there is that my child needs someone to hold their hand, and no employer wants to have to find that out later. And so you're
Exactly.
probably not going to get the job. I wouldn't hire somebody in that instance. And it's not that I'm a hard ass or anything, but I need people who are take initiative. And I've often told people my best employees were people that didn't have to hold their hand. They knew what they had to do and they got it done.
Hmm.
And every employer is going to say the same thing because you have enough to do as the owner or the manager than to have to be, hand holding someone. I had a young man named Patrick years ago. He was a good looking kid. All the girls who worked for me loved Patrick. And Patrick was a good worker if you were in the room with him. But if you left him to his own devices, he would sit down and text and be on his phone. He wouldn't do anything. I remember an instance where we were at a studio and he had a list that had to get done, and we all left to go pick up something else. I came back and he was sitting down. I said, "Why are you sitting down?" He said, "Well, I finished sweeping." And I said, "But that's not all that's on the list." And he said, "Well, I wasn't sure if you wanted me to do everything on the list." And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. I don't think that a, a, a child that has been raised to take initiative would have done that. They would have said, "Well, this is the list that needs to get done. I'm going to impress my boss by getting it done for him."
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, back to so some of the things that the studies have shown is that children who grow up with helicopter, snowplow, lawnmower, they lack decision making power. They have lower self esteem. They have poor leadership skills because someone else has been leading them most of their life. They have an inability to handle problems independently, and they have diminished earning potential because it's hard to move up if you can't be a leader. Most
Hmm.
people who move up the ladder are leaders. And that's the reason they move up.
Right.
Um, and so I have seen this as being a small business owner. When I was coaching baseball, I would see this occasionally where a parent would. I'll tell you a funny story because I want to get to at the end of this interview. I thought we would talk about sports and kids and school. But
Hmm.
one of the things that I had a parent, so my assistant coach when I coached ball was played professional baseball. At the time was the third base coach for the Toronto Blue Jays. So he only could coach with me in the fall after the season was over. He was a catcher in pro ball. He's now coaching the Cubs AAA club,
Wow.
but he was a scout for them for catchers and whatnot. I had a young kid who wanted to be a catcher, and it's preseason, so we're just practicing. And Marty starts to help this child, like showing him what to do. There's some things he wasn't doing right. And the mom walked on the field and said, "No, no, 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 you can't do that. He has a coach that I pay for." And I said, "Well, who's the coach?" And she told me. I said, "I've never heard of him, but I don't know where he dropped out of baseball at the end of high school or whatever, but this is a guy who plays pro ball as a catcher and
Yeah.
scouts catchers. Like, who are you going to listen to?" And she said, "Well, we were told not to let anyone tinker with him." So I had no choice but to not teach him how to do some things that he wasn't doing correctly. And I
Right.
think that this is the problem, is that we're trying to protect our kids from things that really aren't that big a problem. What would
Exactly.
have been the harm, to be honest?
No,
And
nothing.
um, in my time playing ball, I had lots of different coaches and I learned different things from them. I picked up different things, and some things worked for me better than other advice, and some
Hmm.
things didn't. But it was good to hear it all so that you could work with it and find out what worked for you the best.
Hmm.
When it comes to the lawnmower, helicopter, and snowplow, they're not letting their children learn by their mistakes. And I think that's probably the headline right there, is that we all know that you learn mostly. I've made a lot of mistakes in life, and I've learned, sometimes brutally, I've learned from those mistakes.
Yeah.
But if my parents had made sure I never had any failures, I wouldn't know how to handle failure when I
Hmm.
got to be older. And
100%.
you know, I wish I was an Elon Musk where everything I did turned to gold, but that's just not how most people's lives are.
No.
And you need to let your kids learn to fail. I'm not
Yeah.
saying in something that's completely drastic that will change their whole life, send them to jail or for something for many years. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the everyday things. I think you and I were talking. I was talking to a college professor who's teaching for a little over 15 years. Said that he's actually had parents call him or walk into his class and ask that their child be allowed to retake a test or be exempt from a project they got a zero on because they didn't turn it in. And he would say, well, but this is the thing, this is a college class, and your
Right.
ability to complete the assignments is
Yes.
is what this is about. And
Yeah.
so no, I'm not going to let them out of the project. They got a zero, they're going to have to do either something extracurricular or they're going to have to make it up with better scores on the rest of their projects. um, and he said that this has become more and more and more common, where he gets emails asking for leniency.
Yeah.
And he said if you go back to his first 5 years as a professor, he never had one instance like that. So
Right.
this is starting to show up more and more and more. It's gotten so bad in some instances. I couldn't believe this when I was reading this, because I was researching research on the downside of, and trying to find some positives
Yeah.
on hovering or lawnmower or snowplow. And I came across, there is a cottage industry in several states where you can hire, if let's say your child goes out of state and you don't want to move to the state, obviously, to hover, lawnmower, snowplow, you can hire someone in that state to go check on them every week, make sure they have food in their refrigerator, their laundry's getting done, check to make sure they're doing their homework. And that person will, if advised by the parents, will buy groceries for them and do their laundry. And they didn't say they would do their homework for them, but I bet if you paid them enough, they might.
Yeah.
Like, I was astounded by that. Everything in life I viewed with my kids was preparing them for life
Yes.
and life on their own. I didn't want them to go out into the world and not know how to do their own laundry, how to make, I'm not a chef, so I didn't teach them how to make gourmet food. But if they wanted to make breakfast, make stuff for dinner instead of eating out every night with fast food, I wanted them to know some of that stuff, give them some life skills. They'll develop the rest on their own if they're not afraid to take some initiative. My daughter, when she was 9 years old, made me breakfast in bed for Father's Day. I didn't even know. I woke up and she was walking in with a tray with eggs and bacon and toast. Um, and I know parents now who say my 24-year-old doesn't know how to make toast. And I'm like, that just can't be possible. I just
Yeah.
can't believe that. Um, so I know that parents who do it, they feel like they're doing what's best for their kids. But honestly, and I will tell you this, I have 4 or 5 elementary school teachers who told me that they can tell that the parents are doing the homework for their child
Oh, wow.
because it's obvious. If you're, parents aren't going to be able to act like a third grader.
Yeah.
So that's going to be apparent that this was somebody who with a higher intellectual ability. And that just blows me away. Like, make your kids do the work. That's what it's about.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. What do you think it that the parents feel the need to overlay and get so involved with, looking over their child's shoulder or being so overly protective, what's
Yeah.
going on in their head? Because it's just, it baffles me sometimes why they feel the need to be like that.
I feel like I think that there's a short-term goal that they're not looking at the long-term goal or the long-term outcome, or I should say unintended consequence, maybe,
Yeah,
that they're not focusing on. So you're helping your child now. Maybe they get a better grade and maybe they have a higher GPA by a small margin because you helped fix
right.
things.
Hmm.
But when they get to college, that's not going to help them because they didn't
Right.
do that work. You did it.
Yeah.
Let's say you help them in college. So they're going to get out and have their first job at a major corporation, and they have never done all of their work themselves. I
Right.
just don't think that's going to turn out well. But I think that sometimes, and I have never interviewed parents who do this, and most parents don't realize they're doing it.
Yeah.
That was one of the funnier things about the studies was that when they would talk to parents and say we're interviewing parents about hovering or lawnmower, they would
Yeah.
say, well, that's not me. And then they would ask, so that what they had to do was they would ask the college students, they had a questionnaire that said, did your parents do this for you or did you do it? And then they
Yeah.
would determine whether that child had hovering parents based on the questionnaire. And
Right.
they most of the parents didn't think that they were doing that. And I
Yeah.
think that it comes, if you're raising your child for 10 years, 15 years, 17, 18 years, maybe you think that these little things throughout time don't add up, but
Right.
they really do.
Hmm.
Um, I just think that my goal always was to prepare them to get out in life and not struggle. And I
Hmm.
don't think that doing everything for them is the best way to handle that. I think the
Oh, yeah.
best way to do that is to teach them how to take care of themselves. And if you don't know how to do something, just call me.
Right.
I'll go over it with you. My parents would always say, well, I got in trouble once. I remember my mom saying, well, how do you think you should handle that? And I was like, well, I was hoping you would. She was like, I'm not handling it for you. You're the one that got in trouble.
Right.
You need to go back. She said, I'll give you some advice. If I was you, I'd go back and talk to the teacher and apologize and say, look, my intention wasn't to be disruptive, and
Yeah.
I apologize for that. I said, you should start there and see where it goes. And I did that. And the teacher said, well, I appreciate that. And so I'm going to reduce your punishment, but you're still going to have some extra stuff you have to do to make up for getting in trouble.
Right.
And that was a good lesson for me that, well, first of all, maybe if I go back and communicate that I wasn't trying to be a little brat, I
Yeah.
just was not focusing on what was best. And I
Right.
know I was disrupting your class, so I'm here to apologize. And I don't think the teacher had heard that very much.
Yeah.
And so he appreciated it. But
Yeah.
I
No.
think that to your question, I just don't think they realize that they're doing it. I also don't think that, like, I have heard parents, you hear them, they'll brag about how well their kids did in school. And sometimes I think that we're living through our kids. That
Yeah.
happens with sports a
Oh.
lot.
Hmm.
Um, I could tell we could go on for a whole extra hour just on my coaching stories with
Yeah.
parents.
Hmm.
Um, but it's almost like an outreach of that. I didn't do well in school and I didn't have the opportunities. I don't want my child to miss out on those opportunities. So I'm going to make sure that we get to college and we're in this position.
Yes.
But if you didn't do the work, you're not going to do well in college. And if someone does the work for you in college, you're not going to do well at your job. And
Yeah.
I, I hope that that somewhat changes. I think that we're focused on a short term. I know a lot of parents, this drives me crazy because my ex-wife and I made sure that she and I were on this page that if we
Yeah.
say don't make a punishment that you can't
Right.
follow through with. Don't get angry and say you're grounded for a month because you know you're not going to be grounded for a month. And it
Right.
doesn't necessarily fit the crime or what they had done. Give them a punishment that you can stick to, because if you keep saying a month and then you end it after 3 days, they'll never believe that you're going to. And it's because the parent doesn't want to see their child sad or hurt,
Hmm.
even though they may have brought on the punishment. And I
Right.
think sometimes we forget that your child living without their phone for 3 days for punishment, they're not going to die. And their life is not going to be over socially. Um, you know, and I'll guarantee you the phone is one that parents should use more. You have good leverage with that phone.
Oh, yeah.
I used to not even take it away. I would just kill the service because on the AT&T app, I could turn off their phone
Oh, really?
service and turn it back on. And I wouldn't even tell them I'm doing it. I would tell them that that's what's going to happen if this happens again. And then we wouldn't even have that. I would turn it off. And they would say, well, why didn't you warn me? I said, I did 2 weeks ago.
Hmm.
And so they started fearing that because they wanted to argue
Yeah.
why it shouldn't be turned off. And I'm like, well, we're not having that argument.
Hmm.
That made my decision. This is it. So,
Right.
but if I had said your phone will be off for a month, I couldn't have stuck to that, especially once they get to be teenagers, because now they're driving, and you really want to know where they are, and you want to be able to reach them,
Yeah.
you know. Which is funny. I always look back at when I was a kid. My mom didn't know where I was half the time.
Yeah.
She only knew what I told her
Yeah,
because there was
exactly.
no way to follow or call me. Before I was able to drive, she would call around the neighborhood to all my friends. Is Brian there? Send him home for dinner if you see him.
Yeah.
Our parents didn't know where we were a lot of times, but
Right.
now I don't think I could live without it. And my
Yeah.
kids are in their 20s.
Oh, I hear you. Now, how does the societal pressure influence parents to adopt these intensive parenting styles?
I think that sometimes parents are, yeah, that's a good point. I think sometimes they're in competition. Um, you see people on Facebook try and make their life look better than their friends'
Yeah.
lives. Um, and it's funny too, if you know that person
Yeah.
really well and you know that what they're posting on Facebook or Instagram or whatever is not really representative of what goes on in their
Yeah.
life, but they want everyone to think that. And I think that the same thing probably goes on because I will see routinely parents say, my child graduated with honors. They had a 4.2, not even a 4, and they're going to this college. So there's probably a lot of that also. Um, I know that years ago, so this would have been before I had kids, or maybe they were very young. I remember a parent telling me that their child didn't get into a good college, that they're going to a community college.
Hmm.
And they were almost embarrassed to say that to me and to people around us because we were on some bleachers. And I just
Right.
remember, I just remember being like, well, okay, I don't need my child to go to Harvard to be proud of them. I just want
Exactly.
them to get out and have a happy life, get a career. That's one thing I pushed at both my kids, like find what it is
Right.
and get a career with it, whether it's a trade or whether you need to go to college, but do what's best for you to provide.
Hmm.
I never remember saying, listen, I'm going to be really disappointed if you don't get into Emory University.
Right.
Um, but there are a lot of parents, and I imagine that goes along with parents who probably are in more affluent
Hmm.
areas,
Yeah.
because presentation and your achievements are more front and center and more um, overtly out there for people. And they make sure that people know with their cars they drive, the house they live in, that
Hmm.
they are high achievers. So it
Yeah.
probably hurts not to have a child who's a high achiever. And one of the things I know, how many kids do you have?
Three.
So I have two, and then my wife has two, so we have four together.
Hmm.
They all come out different.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
when I would before I had kids, I bet you believe this too. I would always say, well, the way the kids turn out, it totally is about how they were raised, and a
Yeah.
lot of that's true. But they have different personalities, and it's
Mhm.
recognizable from the first 3 months.
Right.
This one's not like the first one or the
Yeah.
third one. And so you're likely to get a child who's really, really good in science and wants to work at NASA. And then you
Hmm.
may have one who just wants to be a welder.
Yeah.
That stuff never bothered me. As long as they have a career that helps them get through life and raise a family, I'm
Exactly.
fine. I'm fine
100%.
with that. But I think that's probably true. Your question's probably dead on that there's some pride involved that leads them to I don't want you to get to the end of high school and not get into a good college. I've even heard some affluent parents who say, well, we went to Auburn and we're an
Hmm.
alumni and we donate to the
Yeah.
Alumni Association. So I can get you into Auburn, but you got to have good grades. And so I could see maybe that being a fear that your child cannot get into the school where you have some sway because their
Yeah.
grades aren't good enough. But in that case, you know, there's other ways to go about that
Oh, yeah.
than doing their
100%.
work for them or
Yeah.
calling up and trying to get them hired somewhere. Um, but that I think that goes, and then that's the same thing, by the way. An offshoot of that is sports,
Hmm.
where I'll tell you a funny story about sports. And I always tell people this. I've coached four people, four young men in baseball whose parents were professional players. And some
Yeah.
of them really good. They played for more than 10 years.
Right.
They were the least hands on, never gave me any, like, hey, you're not doing it right, or I want my kid to play more. Never heard a word from them.
Right.
In fact, one of them, it used to make me laugh. He would, when his son would get up to bat, he didn't want his son looking back at him as if he was nervous not to do well in front of his dad, his famous
Yeah.
dad. So every
Mhm.
time his son would get up to bat, he would go walk off around the backside of the where you buy the drinks, the
Yeah.
vending
Yeah.
area,
Hmm.
so that his son wouldn't be looking for him. He would just focus on what was going on in the game.
Yeah.
Never any trouble. It was always the parents who never played past middle school
Right.
or something who wanted their child to be something that they weren't. And when it comes to athletics, one of the things that I'm just going to tell parents right now, you can go and take them to a place where someone teaches them how to throw better, run faster, throw farther, hit farther. There's a lot of natural ability that just comes with it. It just
Yeah.
is. That person who says they can help your kid throw pitch faster, well, good technique and good arm angles and stuff, he can get maybe 5% more speed out of that pitch, maybe a
Hmm.
tad more, but you're never going to take a child who's throwing at one speed and get them 30 miles an hour faster. That's because
Yeah.
that's just not their arm. They just don't
Right.
have that ability. It's just like
Yeah.
running. There's some people who don't even work at it who can
Yeah.
take off running and outrun, someone who looks like they are more athletic.
Yeah.
And the same with One of the guys I played with when I was younger, he was a skinny guy. He didn't look like he had much muscle, but he could hit a ball a long ways.
Yeah.
That was his ability. And the same goes with football, basketball, golf. So the money that these industries are generating from parents by telling them that they can make their kid an all-star
Yeah.
or can get them into college, that's not true. That's
Right.
100% not true. Um, they're lying to you because they want that. They're generating income off of you. That
Yes.
doesn't mean you shouldn't take them there, but I want everyone to have realistic goals. The other thing, too, when it comes to baseball in particular, so
Hmm.
most colleges, let's say a D1, which would be your highest
Right.
college, they will have, the number slips me. I think it's 28 to 30 scholarships for football because football generates all the money. If you're at
Yeah.
Ohio State, University of Georgia, you name it, Texas A&M, the
Hmm.
football programs, tickets, and TV money generates the biggest income by far.
Oh, yeah.
What that means, though, they also have to give that many out because of Title IX, which is a good thing to female sports. So when it comes to men's basketball or baseball in particular,
Hmm.
if you think your child's going to get a scholarship for baseball, you're going down the wrong road because baseball typically in a D1 school may have one scholarship a year, but most
Right.
of them only give half scholarships and there may only be two or three.
Right.
And what that means, by the way, is that if the coach of University of Georgia or Florida State comes to you and says, I want your son to play on my baseball team in college,
Hmm.
he's got to be able to get in on his grades also.
Yeah.
So that comes back to not letting, staying abreast of what's going on with your child in school because they have to have good grades. And it just blew my every teacher I've talked to will tell you that it is not uncommon for kids to miss class because of travel ball, to have a parent write a note and say they didn't do their homework last night because they were playing ball until 10:30 at night and they're only in fifth grade.
Yeah.
Um, so we're not always prioritizing the grades,
Yeah.
but they're going to need grades to get in. There's a great story out of University of Georgia. There's a young man named Lad McConkey who now plays for the Chargers, and he didn't get a scholarship offer, but he got into UGA and walked on. And by the time he was a junior, they had offered him a scholarship because he had been phenomenal. But
Yeah.
what would he have done? How would that story have gone if he couldn't get into the school?
Yeah.
So those are the things that parents need to consider. And sometimes I think that parents, particularly when it comes to sports, it's going to be dads. Um, they do the lawnmower or the snow plowing for their
Hmm.
child, coming up and telling me that he needs to play more catcher, or he needs to play. He only likes to play outfield, or he
Yeah.
just wants to pitch. And you're like, well, okay, this is not the pros, and that's not how we do things here.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to teach them how to play ball the right way. Um, and I think that sometimes they're not looking at things from the right priority list. That
Hmm.
would be my assessment. And I have in the book, by the way, and they're staggering. I have to look at them again. It's been a while, but the odds of your child making it onto a D1 or even a D2 college program,
Yeah.
they're astronomical. Think about all the high schools in this country pumping
Hmm.
out athletes and all
Yeah.
those colleges. And there's a lot of them, but there's a lot of they're all vying for those best players.
Yeah.
Um, so I want parents to you got to take it with some common sense that unless they're phenomenal. Like I've had parents who would come to me and said, "You think my child has what it takes to play college?" And the answer to that is, if you have to ask me, probably not.
Right.
The kids who are that good shine in a way where you see them on the field and you're like, why are they on the field with these average high school
Yeah.
kids or average eighth graders? I've had four players in my time. I told the parents they don't need to move up to the next level. Honestly, they should skip two levels up. They're that good. They're not even being challenged at this level. That's the
Yeah.
kid who will go on and play for college.
Right.
The competition is so high once you get out of high school that if your child is not shining in a way where they're on the headlines
Hmm.
or they're the one that everyone comes to see at the showcase,
Yeah.
the chances of them getting into a school and playing are very small.
Yes. 100%. It's crazy because all my children played sports. So, when every parent thought their child was an all-star player. And, some of these parents were really, really, over the top. They would have their
Oh
kids
yeah.
in like maybe two or three travel teams. These kids
Mhm.
were, when do they have the time to study? When do they
Yeah.
have energy? If you're doing that and you're constantly traveling, it's that's all you're doing. It takes a
Yeah.
good portion of your time, your energy, and the child has, for me personally, the child should be exploring other areas of life also. It's not all about the sports. And just like you said,
Right.
there's a very, very small percentage that's going to go to the all-stars, and or be accepted into a fine, college for baseball or football. The chances are very slim. You have to really shine, like you said. And sometimes it would bother me because the child needs to really focus on school, focus on friendships and socialization. And a lot of these, they get socializations in these teams and they make friends and they learn how to become a team. But still, there's other areas of life they should be focusing on too, I think.
Yeah. The gentleman who works for me manages my gym. He's retired from the railroad, so this is just something he does because he doesn't want to sit at home all day.
Yeah.
And I like it that he's older and responsible, so he's a perfect person. I really lucked out there.
Yeah.
His two younger daughters are in travel volleyball.
Hmm.
So over the next 3 weeks, he will be in Philadelphia for 4 days, New Orleans for 3 days.
Hmm.
He'll be in Orlando for 4 days and then Texas. And he readily will admit to me that his girls are not going to make it into a college program.
Yeah.
But mom wants and dad want them to live out their fun now. And I guess that's fine. It sounds like they have a realistic point of view of what they're doing this for.
Yeah.
But he was telling me that when they were at some of these tournaments, there'll be 250 teams. Some
Hmm.
of the high schools have recruited the best players in the country.
Yeah.
And his daughters are all around 5'4", 5'6". And he said, some of these teams, the girls playing in high school look like they're 26. They're 6'1", 6'2". They can jump completely with their arms over the net. And he said, even if you're in that type of sport, even if his girls were super athletic, they're never going to be able to compete with that because that goes back to what I'm talking about. The fact that they grew to 6'1", that's a natural ability that you just can't install
Yeah.
in your child. And then basketball is very, very much like that also. I
Yeah.
imagine if you're a college scout, you show up at the high school game to check out a player and he's 5'8", you're
Yeah.
probably walking out after the first quarter.
Right. I know, there's a lot of people too. Like if you think about it, when you play sports and you play sports from such a young age and you go into high school and then you go into college and you're playing sports, I've known people that have gotten hip replacements and had to go for surgeries because of all this aggressive, sports playing throughout the years had worn on
Mhm.
their body. And to me, I think that's crazy also. It's like there has to be a limitation where we keep it safe for the children. If you keep pushing your child and you keep trying to get them and you think they're going to be in the all stars and these children are really, wearing and tearing their body, to be have to, at such a young age, because you see it when even the sports players, in the NFL and other sports players, their body is worn and torn by a certain age. That's why they retire at a certain age, because they're not only cannot keep up with people, with the younger ones, but
Right.
their body is destroyed inside.
Well, I played after I stopped trying to play. I played from the time I was 26 till I was 47 in a wood bat league, the men's wood bat league. And I've had two hip replacements, elbow surgery, shoulder surgery.
There you
I ended
go.
up stopped playing because I tore my Achilles on my left side right off the heel bone at 47. And I remember it was a long recovery. That one
Yeah.
was hard. And it was feeling really good after 9 months. And I was talking, I guess I didn't even know what I was saying, but my wife was like, wait, you're not thinking of going back and playing ball? I said, what? Why? And she said, first of all, I know in your head you think you're still 30, but your body is trying to tell you it's not. So I was like, okay, I, I have a feeling there won't be so much harmony in the household if I go back and play again.
Yeah.
And, like I said, I just had my last hip replacement actually a year ago tomorrow.
Hmm.
Um, but I loved every minute of it. I wouldn't change anything. But I also understood that the continued mileage on my joints were going to lead to this.
Yeah.
And so I don't care so much as long as you have a healthy understanding. When it comes to pros, they're making a lot of money. That's the trade-off they've made. I'm making
Yeah.
millions, so I will endure this. And in most cases, a pro's actual career span is not very long. So they're
Yeah.
trying to make as much money as they can
Yep.
and extend their playing time.
Hmm.
Um, but it's very rare to see a professional athlete go over 40. Your Tom Brady's and such; those are very rare
Yeah.
athletes um, who knows what kind of genetics he has, but that's
Yeah.
unusual to be honest. Um, but you're right. And I will say this: baseball is a great example of this. So. Um, a lot of kids by high school are having ligament replacement surgery in their elbow, Tommy John surgery.
Yeah.
It used to be, and I've read many professional orthopedists who have talked about this, who work with athletes, um, that they would maybe see three high school age kids a year, and now they're seeing 30
Yep.
each.
Hmm.
And uh, part of the problem with that everyone seems to believe, and I believe it as well. When I was growing up playing ball, there wasn't so much a focus on throwing harder.
Yeah.
Like the next pitch shouldn't be harder than the last. That wasn't a focus. It was being accurate, being able to land my pitch wherever I threw it.
Yeah.
Now there's less focus on being accurate, as more focus on how hard can you throw.
Right.
And so if you were playing in the 80s and 90s or before that, you as a starting pitcher were not supposed to throw 100% on every throw because that'll wear you out. You were
Yeah.
supposed to throw about 75 to 80% and save that last 20 if you needed it.
Hmm.
But now everyone's trying to throw 100 miles an hour, and that's a
Yeah.
lot of torque on those joints. And when it comes to high school kids, there's a misconception by parents. I've had this conversation 2, 3 dozen times. They
Yeah.
believe that if they get the ligament replacement surgery early, then that'll help them be able to throw harder later. But that's not the case. The studies
No.
show that wherever they are throwing at the time they tear their elbow,
Hmm.
that's their stopping point. They'll never go beyond that because
Right.
of the damage and the scar tissue and whatnot. That doesn't mean they won't get a little stronger, but it's not turning them into a bionic arm.
Exactly.
That's not happening. And so there's a lot of misconception around that. When I was playing too, That was before radar gun. There's a radar gun now at every high school. There's people driving me crazy. There'll be parents with a radar gun they bought when I was coaching eighth or sixth graders.
Hmm.
You don't need to measure. It doesn't matter what a sixth grader is
Yeah.
throwing. I just need them to
Hmm.
be able to get it. Most of them can't aim it that well anyway at that age. I just need them to get, we have bigger problems. We're
Yeah.
trying to teach them how to do it right. I don't want them trying to throw an extra 10, add 10 miles an hour to their throw.
Right.
But if you're creating that habit at that age, then yeah, you're probably going to tear the elbow.
Hmm.
Um, and so that just is what happens. You have more. I think pros MLB recently had a statistic that showed that it used to be maybe 10% of pitchers came into Major League Baseball
Yeah.
already having Tommy John surgery, and now it's up above 35%.
Right.
And so where is that going? Are we going to have 50% of them tearing their elbow before they get there?
Hmm.
We're kind of heading in that direction. You have kids in softball. There was a girl who recently threw the fastest softball ever pitched. I think it was last week.
Yeah.
I hope it doesn't start going that way where softball pitchers are trying to outpitch and speed the record.
Yeah.
But that's probably what will happen, and you'll start seeing more shoulder injuries because of that.
Oh, yeah.
Um, there are a lot of pitchers who pitched when I was growing up that I idolized who probably wouldn't even make it in pro sports today
Right.
because someone would have put a gun on them and said, "Wow, they don't throw very hard."
Hmm.
And
100%.
some of them are in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. It's
So, but we've really gotten off topic on that. But I feel like those two things really kind of connect. You have helicopter parenting and snowplow and lawnmower at the education level, but it sort of translates over to sports where
yeah.
you have sort of the same thing because parents, if the arguments I've gotten into with parents when I was coaching was that they felt like their kid wasn't doing well because of I'm putting them in the wrong position or I'm not giving them enough time. One of them told me he needs to be the first batter. He needs to be the leadoff hitter. That's his problem.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, no. You get up to the plate, you hit the ball.
Right.
This is not, you know, where that makes no sense. So, but parents will come up with excuses because they see their child they have visions, I guess, of them being a star player and they're standing there clapping and all the other parents are jealous that their child is the one who's going to go on to get that big contract.
Hmm.
And that just is so rare,
It
so
is rare.
rare.
It's
All
so
of the
rare.
kids I told you earlier, I said were good enough to go on to play at a D1 college. Not one of them made it in the pros.
Right. It's 100%. Before we go, I want to ask you one important question. Over the past decade, we've been seeing a growing trend on prescription medication for children. What are your
Mhm.
thoughts on this trend? Because I think this is a very important topic because I'm seeing a lot of kids getting put on medications for anxiety and depression. And I think a lot of it has to also go with, what the topic we've been talking about today. And I think, so what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I tell a story in the book. I may have told it earlier on here, but I had a parent tell me that the doctor kept giving their son medicine for ADHD and anxiety, and it wouldn't work. And so the third time they went into the office, the doctor flipped open a book with little pouches, and it had all the different medications and asked the child to choose which one they were going to try next.
Hmm.
And what that says to me is that they don't know what works. They're just throwing drugs at you to try and mitigate a problem that probably isn't really that big an issue. I just finished reading a book called Follow the Science by a health reporter. Oh God, I'm embarrassed. I can't remember her name. She deserves credit here, but it's a really good book. But one of the things she discovered was that a lot of these doctors are getting money for however many pills they prescribe.
Oh, wow.
And I fear that that has some implications here because I just don't. I had when I had my restaurant, I was astounded. All the girl, I bet you two-thirds of the high school girls that worked for me were on depression and anxiety medicine. I had a
Hmm.
conversation with one girl one day. She was 16. I said, "What? Why are you so anxious? What would you say?" She said, "You just don't understand what it's like having to get good grades and dating and then having to work." And I said, "Well, I went through all that same stuff. It's not new to your generation."
Yeah.
And I think that um, I read a quote from a Stanford doctor who said that dealing with stress and anxiety is actually a muscle
Hmm.
that you should develop at a young age so that you can get through life without melting down
Right.
at every little thing. And if you're taking a pill that's taking away all your feelings about that, then you're
Hmm.
probably never developing that, which means that you're going to be on that medication maybe for life.
Right.
Um, the numbers of kids who are on drugs, though, really blew me away. I
Yeah.
have the statistics in the book, but the numbers really took me back a little bit. I think that um, there's a lot of debate about whether some of the school shootings, it seems to be that at first I heard this was debunked, but then I saw a larger study that a lot of them were on medication, and then people were relating it to the fact that the medication made them do it. I
Yeah.
don't know if that's been proven. It could just be dumb luck because so many kids are on medication that it just happens to be that way. But one of the things that does occur to me is that if you're taking away my feelings about things, it's probably easier to do something harsh because you're not feeling it as much.
Hmm.
Like if I was to hurt somebody intentionally, even if I was mad, I would still feel bad about it. And hopefully I wouldn't do it because I know how I would feel. My conscience would get to me. But if
Yeah.
you're taking that away and smoothing it over,
Hmm.
maybe there is something to that. I'm not saying there is. I'm not a researcher on this end, but I
Hmm.
don't feel like these drugs. First of all, these drugs are messing with your brain chemistry, and I just don't think that that's a good thing, particularly at a young age. And I think I
Yeah.
told you once before. I had a girl who texted me one day that she was quitting because she had been mistreated at the restaurant and she hated everyone there. And this was someone who I thought was very happy
Hmm.
working for us. And I always would kid with her. I thought she's a great girl. I love her to death. About 2 days later, her mom came in and apologized and said she had forgotten to take her medication for 3 straight days and she was just swinging hard. And I thought, well, if that's what the medications do when you come off of them, that doesn't sound like a good thing to me.
Yeah. It isn't.
Um, Maybe I'm just old school. I don't want anyone messing with my brain chemistry um, until I have Alzheimer's. But I just don't think that it's a good thing. And I feel like what's happening now um, is that doctors are just throwing drugs at things. I tell this story in the book, but I have two friends who have kids who were young boys who were going through divorce. The kids weren't going through divorce, but the parents of these kids were. And it was a messy, like a lot of fighting.
Yeah.
Um, I don't care what people say, it affects the kids. I went through it with my parents. It was hard.
Yeah.
And they took the kids because they were acting out in school. They were basically angry all the
Yeah.
time. They took
Mhm.
them to a psychologist, not the same one. These are in two different states. The psychologist, within 20 minutes, diagnosed them as being bipolar and gave them medication. And I was like, but how do you, but 20 minutes? That doesn't seem and also I would think that a psychologist would put together the two like divorce, a lot of drama in the house, a lot of fighting, and teenagers are already emotional.
Yes.
Um, putting those together, you would say, I think what he needs is to come regularly and talk to someone so he can get his feelings out. But instead, they
Exactly.
tried to put him on medication. In both cases, the medication made the child feel weird and out of place, and they stopped doing it after a couple of weeks. But I was thinking about that story, and I started researching diagnosing bipolar, and I came across I think she's out of University of Wisconsin. She's the number one bipolar researcher in the country, and she has bipolar
Hmm.
disorder. And she says that in her writings that you can't diagnose bipolar in less than 3 years because a lot of the symptoms mirror other issues. So you need to go along checking boxes and sort of identifying things. And even Dr. Phil had a page on it where he said there needs to be blood work done to check hormone levels. There needs to be this and that. In his, I think it was his analogy was that it was 2.5 to 3.5 years to diagnose. So
Yeah.
how are these kids getting diagnosed within 20 minutes? And that just really throws me. And it makes, there's a lot of distrust in the medical industry right now because of what went on throughout COVID and whatnot, and a lot of things that have been exposed lately with the MAHA movement. But when I hear of a doctor just throwing drugs at a child in that instance, that really is another chink in the armor where you're like, I thought these people were the smartest,
Yeah.
but they didn't even consider his life situation before giving him a drug.
It's very scary. Do you find that throughout your own experiences, alternative therapies or different natural therapies that have been very successful with some of the children that you have come across?
I only know a few parents who are doing that, and they seem to think that it has worked very well. Um, and there's a variety of them. I know one parent who's using CBD.
Hmm.
And for everybody who's not aware of what that is, so marijuana has two compounds. There's THC and CBD in it. The
Hmm.
THC is responsible for why you are happy and can't stop laughing at stupid stuff,
Hmm.
and why you get the munchies. Um, CBD is a compound that just seems to take away, sort of relax you naturally. It's
Hmm.
only in your system for a couple hours, um, and seems to do well when you come off of it. You do not go right back to having, anxious feelings. I know a couple parents who've used that. I know a couple parents who just took their kids off of all sugars and said it was amazing the difference. Um, I think the problem is because we live in a pharmaceutical, that we're the most prescribed country in the world, that
Yep.
they have not done a lot of testing or research on alternative methods. And I think that that's really sad. There
It
should
is.
be. We should go. I'm not against drugs. I just think that we shouldn't go there first.
Right. I agree. I think that's very true. And I also think that nutrition plays a huge part. In the
Mhm.
United States, we are the most corrupt food industry. And there are so many artificial preservatives and things in our food that can actually trigger our brain to react certain ways.
Yeah,
And the high sugar levels, there are a lot of foods. That's why we have such a high ADHD and depression and anxiety. A lot of these foods that have all these, artificial preservatives and have all these chemicals in the food to make them look nicer or bigger or, last longer. They're playing a role on the function of the brain. And
yeah,
people need to look into that also. There are great supplements out there, and people have to also, go to the root cause. What now is in my child's life that is really changing my child's behavior? Why is my child behaving like this? Why is my child doing
mhm,
this? And it also, we have to also take responsibility. Like this whole topic has been about, snow plowing, being overprotective, watching
yeah,
over, that also can play a big role because that, when we are too overprotective and we are too watching over our children, trying to do everything for them, that itself, it could cause anxiety. And then that anxiety leads to depression. So we really have to look at everything
yeah.
over. I
Well, a lot
think.
of times too, lawnmower, helicopter, snowplow parents don't like to say no to their kids.
Yes.
And so maybe your kid is eating too much of the wrong things. And in our house, we say no.
Yes.
And our kids are older. We have one in college still. We can't make her eat better, but we can be in her ear enough that it sinks in over time, we hope. And I know this is off school. You know, my wife and I, we call it clean. It's what we call one ingredient. So we eat fruits, vegetables, and meats,
Mhm.
mostly no processed foods. I don't have real sugar in this house.
Mhm.
Um, so if it grows in the ground or something eats what grows in the ground, we can eat those things. We do have a splurge day, but we try and eat fairly clean. And I will tell you, since I started doing that, I stopped snoring many, many years ago. Um, I was always congested. That went away. Um, Certain ailment, like I had joint pain from
Mhm.
2014 through 17, and I was about to go and I figured I had arthritis. When we started eating clean, it all went away. And it was literally within 3 to 4 days of switching our diet.
Right.
So there's something to be said for that. And people, I think, take this, particularly older people. I found that, like my in-laws, they're like, well, we've always eaten this way. I'm like, I get it, but look around at all the people who have issues. Maybe
Hmm.
that's not the right thing, but I'm never going to
Right.
change them. They're too old. They're set in their
Exactly.
ways. But we
Hmm.
can work on the younger generation. There is a
Yes.
good book out there I highly recommend by Callie Means. She's a Stanford educated doctor who realized that medical school didn't teach her anything about nutrition.
Hmm.
So she set out to do it herself. And she wrote a book called Good Energy. It just came out a few months ago. Very good book. And she goes through what all the different foods and food dyes and different things and what they do inside your body, cellular
Hmm.
wise. And
Right.
so, if nothing else, maybe it'll scare people into at least giving some of those things a try.
Hmm.
I was happy to see McCormick Foods, who supplies a lot of restaurant food. They have promised to get rid of food dyes in the next 6 months entirely. So that's a good start. I think that there's so many things metabolically and diseases that have literally on the charts over the last 20 years. They're not
Yeah.
just getting a little more common, they're really going up fast. And there
Right.
has to be some reason for that. And the fact that some of the corporations who participate in this don't want to figure it out, well, we just shouldn't be we shouldn't rely on them. We need to
Exactly.
take the wheel and make sure that these things are good for us. And
100%.
some things, by the way, one of the things I learned, uh, I was doing a video for the CDC, but one of the things I learned was that a lot of things we eat that harm our body, they don't harm you right away. It's
Hmm.
a process that goes on for years, and you may not even realize it.
Right.
That stuff is starting to break down
Hmm.
until it hits you where you're feeling pain or something's you know not functioning correctly.
Hmm.
And so everybody needs to take, and you need to do this for your kids. If we're relating this to school, I wrote a chapter in there about the lunches that they serve our kids.
Right.
they're they're not doing them, they're doing them a disservice by giving them high fructose corn syrup foods. They're giving them a lot of carbs, and then they expect them to go sit down after their insulin level and sugar levels have shot up, and sit down and pay attention in class. That's just counterproductive.
Oh, yeah.
And I know good food costs a little more money. I think most parents would throw an extra dollar in every day if they could get better food. I just do.
100%. Oh, yes. Now, if we had to take
And
today's
it's almost ironic because a lot of these kids go to health class where they tell them what to eat and what not to eat. And then they go to the lunchroom and it's the opposite
yeah,
of
it
what
defeats
they
the
just
purpose.
learned.
Exactly, 100%. It's terrible, but we really have to get on the same page. So if we're going to teach them one thing, then we need to do it in the cafeteria as well. We need to teach them how to be healthy. They need to see it through examples, through their parents, through the school, and this way they can really create a healthy lifestyle for their own selves. So when they get older, they are on the right path because what they see now in their environment is what they're going to probably do later on unless they get to a point where they have a reason to need to change. But definitely. Now, in today's conversation, what are some things you'd like to emphasize to the listeners that you feel is very important?
Well, I often talk about whenever you ask me this question or anyone else, I always tell parents to stay involved. That's my number one key. But if we're relating it to this, stay involved with your kids, but don't do everything for them. Let
Yes.
them make some mistakes. Let them learn from those mistakes. In fact, you can have a good conversation with why that failed, a decision they made, or why something they tried didn't work. Maybe
Mhm.
next time we try it this way, or you try it
Right.
this way. So staying involved doesn't mean doing everything for them. And
Exactly.
everyone should, you got to look at the long term. I know that when you punish your child, it hurts. Sometimes it's terrible as a parent to see that your punishment is hurting your child. But you got to
Mhm.
look at it as though I'm doing this for the long term, for the what it
Exactly.
does for them, not what is going on today.
Right.
I don't want them to make some of those big mistakes. So let's try and nip them in the bud now.
Exactly.
Um, so I would just say, if we're going to relate it to today's conversation, you know, stay abreast of everything they're doing. Check their social media, check their grades, pay attention to what they're struggling in school, but don't do it all for them. And for
Yeah,
God's sakes, don't call their employer and talk to them. Let them be the one to do it. They'll learn from that. They
they
also
will.
learn confidence. If you make your child, when my mom made me go apologize to the doctor, to the teacher, I was nervous all day knowing I was going to do that.
Yeah.
But one of the things I found out was that after I had the conversation, I don't know what I was nervous about. And so that
Right.
gives you confidence as a kid to know that, okay, it's not so scary to go and, first of all, say I was wrong. Second of all, it's not so scary to go talk to an adult who's mad at you.
Yeah.
Um, and there's nothing bad that can come of trying to correct something that went wrong.
Exactly. 100%. Now, where can people find your book?
Well, we're on all the major bookstores, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Apple. You can get it in print, you can get it in audio, or you can get it in ebook.
Hmm.
Obviously, on Apple, it's only ebook, but the rest of the stores have. And on Spotify, if you're a premium member, you can listen to the audiobook on their Find Away Voices app. Um, and it's pretty much everywhere. And I have a link on Bryan, Bryan, Thomas, Wetzel.com. If you're having trouble finding it, it'll take you right to the page of your favorite bookstore to purchase it.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And do you have any services that you provide? You have the book, but do you provide any services to parents or anything like that right now at the moment?
I'm not providing any services at the moment. I do offer advice. People will email me about stuff that's going on in their school. And
Hmm.
remember, I have a wife in the house who's a teacher, so I will respond to them every time. Sometimes, like the other week, I had more than 60 emails. It took me a little bit to get through them all, but I will respond and kind of give you my impression of what's best. And I'll even ask my wife, like, if you were the teacher in this situation, what would be best for the parent to do? And I'll give them my best advice. It doesn't mean that it's 100% accurate and will work every time, but based on my experience in the school system and my wife's, I will try and give you the best advice we can for whatever it is you're looking for as far as help.
I love that.
And there's
I
no
think
charge. I just do it. Like I said, I'm not working in that industry the way I was. So I'm doing it. I'll do it to help out. There's no charge for that.
I love that. And they should go on your website to probably get in touch with you. Is that the
Yes.
best?
Yep.
Wonderful. Well, this has been great, Bryan. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a really important topic. I think, this is a topic that I see all the time. I think parents really need to realize when they need to kind of let go and let their child, learn for themselves and realize that our job is to teach our children, but not do everything for them. And I think you made that really clear and through your examples and your stories. And I thank you so much for coming on the show today because this topic definitely needed to be talked about.
Well, thanks for having me back.
Oh, you're very welcome. You have a great day.
You too.